Tonight, we have seen one of the most important moments in recent history of Europe, a country, rather a continent, that has been so riven with violence, so riven with war, so riven with conflict. And we have seen the way that the America First agenda, the Britain First agenda, the Brexit agenda has started to create an opportunity for peace. I don't believe for one second that Donald Trump is against Zelensky. I don't believe for one second he's particularly in favor of Putin. I think what he's in favor of is a peace that will endure, a genuine and lasting peace, something that we can all believe in. And I want you to watch tonight as I talk to you about what I think is one of the most important moments in our post-war history. My goodness me, my friends, what has happened to us? How have we been so traduced that we can't bring our own communities together and can't look after our own affairs? But Donald Trump has come in and started to change things. Now, I remember at the time of Edward Snowden and at the time of Julian Assange, we saw on so many occasions leaks in our information and in our national security data. And governments went crazy about that. And they said, this is unacceptable. How dare you release all of this information? But what happened after that was really very simple. We started to realize that, in a sense, diplomacy is nonsense. Why sit in the Oval Office and say, hey, isn't this great? You're marvelous. And Mr. President, you have done so much for us. Why lie? Why not say that the situation that's been created after the Second World War has been a shambles? That we are now riven with conflict. Our nations are being swamped by uncontrolled immigration. We are turning against each other as European brothers. And by the way, I should say European cousins. But, you know, I don't believe that a Ukrainian and a Russian are the same. But then again, I don't believe that a Pakistani and an Indian are the same. I don't believe that a Brit should necessarily welcome a Armenian into their house. I believe that we are all separate people who have our own separate cultures, who have our own separate traditions, who have our own separate beliefs. That must be stood by. And that is what we've got completely wrong in Europe today. Now, I'm going to show you some of the videos of Zelensky in the Oval Office today. But I'm going to say this to you. I honestly think that this discussion was the first sensible discussion we've seen in decades. You know, Donald Trump has a go at Zelensky. JD Vance has a go at Zelensky about the fact that they've consumed enormous military resources on what has been fundamentally a complete failure. And when I say a complete failure, I don't mean a complete military failure. I mean a complete diplomatic failure. And I think that what we need to do now is we need to say, well, that's great, Donald Trump and JD Vance. How does Ukraine respond? And then Zelensky began responding. He said, look, I'm going to give my opinion. I'm going to make my argument. I'm going to make my point. Well, do you know something? When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State of the United States of America, apparently all these diplomatic messages that were leaked by Edward Snowden, all of them said that the Middle East wanted somebody to come in and deal with their problems. And all of these Middle Eastern countries all said that if the United States of America bombs Iran, then we will do nothing other than we'll complain. We'll say, oh, it's terrible America's done this. But secretly, can you do it for us? No, no, no. We need to be much more sensible about this. We need to say, look, this is a serious game in Ukraine. This is a serious game in Europe. This is a serious game around the world, and it's time to have a serious discussion. I'm going to put up a comment right here, right now, who's somebody who says that Zelensky was disrespectful. You know something? I think it's time that we have a serious discussion. What are you going to do about the fact that $350 billion was spent by America and $350 billion was spent by Europe? What are you going to do about that? And I think It was one of the more sensible and serious discussions that has ever taken place. I don't believe that Donald Trump was offended. I think Donald Trump actually loved it. I think JD Vance loved it because it was an opportunity to say, we're serious statesmen. We're having a serious discussion about the issues that are taking place in the world. And if you don't like the fact that we're going to have a serious discussion, then you believe whatever, motherhood and apple pie world that you believe in. But how many times have we, as friends and supporters of each other, how many times have we believed that, we were being flannelled by the diplomacy? Oh, such a good friend of mine. Come and meet the king. Here's your letter. It's garbage. The reality is that we are starting to say, as a group of people, that we want to get serious about our protection. You know something? If we need to fight a war to protect ourselves, we'll fight a war. If we need to arm Ukraine, we'll arm Ukraine. If we need to do a deal with Russia, we'll do a deal with Russia. But what I don't agree with is this continual left-wing diplomacy garbage where we all pretend to like each other. I can't stand Keir Starmer. Doesn't mean I'm unpatriotic to my country. Doesn't mean that I have a problem with some of the things he's doing. But why pretend? I think that we're now in a position where we've got to grow up as a world. And we've got to get away from this. Oh, we're all good friends now. We're all going to do this. We're all going to do that. What rubbish. We need to be much more serious. Let me show you about one of the first arguments that took place. And I think, by the way, I'm going to argue with you on this, that we need more serious discussions like this.
We had conversations with him, a lot of conversations, my bilateral conversation. And we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems?
I am going to tell you why this is so important for me and why I think it should be so important for you. Because the political left will tell you that we all need to, put politics aside. We all need to stop arguing. We need to say some things are too important for politics. Let's leave them to the international court. Well, hey, we left the international court to decide on the Chagos Islands, where we're now going to give away one of Britain and America's most important military assets and pay the people that receive it £17 billion to do it. I think that we need to remember something about politics. We need to remember something about diplomacy. We need to remember something about discourse and discord. And we need to remember that this is what makes us powerful. I will tell you what we are doing as the British patriotic movement, as the America First movement, as the Brexit movement, as the Tommy Robinson movement, as UKIP, as Reform, as the Right to the Conservative Party, the Andre Walker Channel, Maya Toosey, and all of the rest. What we're doing is saying that behind closed doors is no good. Hidden deals are no good. Get this out in the open. Let's negotiate and let's make our points openly. Let's end the whole, you can't say that. Because you can't say that. I'm not doing that a third time. Yeah, but that is what is the enemy of peace. That's the enemy of decency. That's the enemy of civility. That's the enemy of our country. Because then what happens is the political left get what they want, which is what they always want, which is a deal done by civil servants and the courts, which never remembers what we need. I am very encouraged by what we saw in the Oval Office today. Have you never had an argument over dinner with somebody? Have you never disagreed with anybody? By the way, I will say one thing about Zelensky. You do have to remember one thing, that he's not a native English speaker. I thought the question, which I'm not going to show to you today, which was, why don't you wear a suit when you're in the Oval Office? I mean, the answer very clearly is, well, this is in solidarity with my brothers and sisters that are fighting, and I don't believe I should dress in anything other than military fatigue. Than when my countrymen are at war. So I do apologise. Somebody sent me a super chat, and I didn't really know how to deal with it. Zelensky is the real bully, not Trump. I actually disagree with you, Gold Mario. And I'll tell you why I disagree with you. Because I actually think that everybody should stand up for their own nation. Everybody should believe in their own public, their own populace, and also fight for their own nation state. When I say that we should have a Brexit agenda, some people call it Britain First agenda. I call it a Brexit agenda. But I think that Trump's America First agenda and Britain's Brexit agenda are actually the same thing. And I always give a good example, and I think it is a good example. If you look at the concern that the political left expressed about chlorine chicken, well, I personally look at the United States of America and say the United States of America has the biggest, its biggest industry is farming. Okay, so if we want cheaper food in our shops, then what we need to do is allow food to come in from the United States of America. Now that requires a trade deal because we have some standards, they have some standards. An example is eggs. We pasteurize our eggs, they refrigerate their eggs. But you know, these things are perfectly easy to get over. But I say that if we were to do a trade deal with the United States of America, yes, it benefits the United States of America to bring to export more food to the United Kingdom, but it benefits the United Kingdom as well, receiving that cheaper food and also selling more of our financial services products into the United States of America. And so I don't think that putting your country first is a bad thing. And so I like the fact that there was an argument in the Oval Office today. I believe in argument, I believe in debate, and I think that's something that's going to make this world and this country a better place. And I'll tell you this, if you don't believe in Donald Trump, or if you didn't believe in Donald Trump before tonight, you've got to believe in him now. Surely you've got to recognize that what he's doing is just a phenomenal thing for this world, because he's finally saying, look, what's in it for us? You know, what is the blank check? Now, hey, by the way, I'm happy to say, as a British person to the United States of America, hey, the reason you're in NATO, the reason you're defending Europe is because you know it's in your overwhelming economic interests for the United Kingdom and other countries to be successful. I'm happy to say that, right? But ultimately, what you can't say is this nebulous, well, you know, we need America to continue to support us because we can't be bothered paying our own bills. That is not acceptable. And we should not allow that. And I think that we need to remember our history and remember our culture and remember the fact the United States of America is standing up for it. By the way, that's the best comment I've had in quite some time on Jesus Loves You in spite of your hairdo. Right, it doesn't matter what hairstyle I ever get, people complain about it. But I think we have now got an opportunity in Ukraine. And let me explain to you what it is. And I think it's an opportunity for the whole of Europe and the whole of the world. First of all, this Put America First agenda is clearly working. We need to follow that in the United Kingdom. We need to start to remember that these executive orders that Donald Trump brought in, nobody was expecting us. Nobody thought they were going to come in, but goodness me, what a difference that made. Would I have personally changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Well, it's difficult for me because I live next to the Irish Sea and next to the English Channel. So I don't know which of those we change, but it's just that direction of travel, isn't it? It's starting to say that we don't want to sit in a world anymore where we pay the check, we pay the bill, we fight for freedom, and freedom's not worth anything. Do you know what I think changed this country and probably changed the Anglosphere? I think was the COVID lockdown. And I'll tell you why I think it was the COVID lockdown, because I think suddenly we realized how fragile freedom is. I genuinely cannot tell you as many times as I want, I cannot tell you enough times that that I think that those lockdowns, putting us under house arrest, was completely morally disgraceful. Can't allow that to happen again. Mandatory medical treatment. It never happened, but it was threatened. And I think we shouldn't do that ever again. And I genuinely think that that has enabled us to come together. Now, I love the comment that's just down here, which is that Zelensky was insolent in the Oval Office. Well, I've got to be honest with you. It's always difficult for me. And I'll tell you why it's difficult for me. Because there's two things here, isn't there? The United States of America, the founding fathers, had a brilliant idea in so many respects, but I think they got one thing wrong: to have the same person to be chief executive and head of state. That is to say that the prime minister and president are the same person in the United States of America. Whereas obviously if you go in Ireland, they have a president and a Taoiseach. You go in Germany, they have a president and chancellor. But in the United States of America, obviously your head of state is the head of your same as your head of government. The reason I think that that's a little bit of a mistake by the founding fathers, who I God bless for, they were phenomenal. The reason I say that is because when there is an argument between the head of government and the head of another government, it can seem disrespectful. But I honestly think that's a function of the US political system. I think that when you're talking about having a serious discussion in the Oval Office, in the open, about politics, then I think that this is the right thing to do. You may disagree. Let's take another look at it.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean. And don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You
God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't been
in this
alone.
cabinet.
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this
We
cabinet.
gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid
thank-
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over In 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong.
And I've had time to review the comment section. I think a lot of you have said that Zelensky was disrespectful, but I thought one thing that was really interesting was somebody said that that the reality is that Zelensky made a threat. I don't think Zelensky made a threat. I think Zelensky made a comment about world peace. And I think it was a well-made point. What somebody was saying was simply this: well, what about all of this? You will feel the pain at some point. I think that's absolutely right, actually. And in this segment, I just want to talk a little bit about that, because we in the West are so convinced that our system will continue that we don't see any risk to it, do we? We believe that freedom, democracy, rule of law, all these things will always exist forever. They've always existed and they always will exist. That is not true. Lord Hannan of Kinclair, Dan Hannan, the former member of the European Parliament, Daily Telegraph columnist, has said, look, these aren't Western values. These are Anglosphere values. We are people who need to stand up and say that our way of life is constantly under threat. Don't wake up every morning and panic about it. Believe me, do not do that. What you need to do is you need to say to yourself, we need to constantly be on the guard to defend freedom. And there's a great phrase in the United States of America, which is freedom isn't free. And I think that that is important. We have to be constantly vigilant. I honestly believe that Vladimir Putin's a crook. I think Zelensky's a crook. My reason for favouring Ukraine is very, very simply this. Russia invaded Ukraine. Had Ukraine invaded Russia, originally had they invaded Russia, then I would have been on Russia's side. I honestly think that we need to remember something, that there is a bigger picture here, isn't there? And that bigger picture is the way that for most of human history, people have clunked each other over the heads and stolen their assets. Freedom, democracy, liberty, rule of law, contract enforcement, those things that were invented in England by the Anglo-Saxons and exported around the world, those are the values which make our world great. And we genuinely need to defend and support those values. And sometimes we have to say to people, hey, I don't agree with you. You know, I have no problem with clunking Zelensky over the head figuratively, as long as you don't do it literally. And I have no problem saying to him that we need to be serious about this. But I'm going to say one thing to you on a serious note, and this is about civility and sensibility and security in Europe. We spent our lives being told by the European Union, we're doing all this in order to stop a European war. Well, first of all, they didn't stop the war in the Balkans, but let's just brush that aside. They didn't stop it in Ukraine either. What we actually need to do is we need to start saying that the institutions we've built, the economics we've created, the civic society we've got has not protected us. Would you go for a beer with Donald Trump? I mean, that'd be quite difficult because he doesn't drink. But figuratively, imagine if you would. You know what? I think I'd enjoy it for about 20 minutes and then it would become quite tiresome. But then again, he'd probably think the same thing about me. But you know what he's actually doing? He's standing up and being realistic. He's saying $350 billion down the road, where have we got to with all of this? And where do we want to get to? And I would argue where we want to get to is not just peace in Ukraine. That's not enough. It's a waste of, well, it's not a waste of time, but it feels like a waste of time. Where we want to get to is we want to get to a position where, you know, there's a global stability. And it's really hard to do when you've got the woke agenda, when you've got people who aren't interested in democracy, when you've got uncontrolled immigration, when you've got people who won't fight for their country and don't believe in it, it's incredibly hard to create global stability. You know, in the time of Churchill, it wasn't very difficult for a leader to stand up and say, let's support Britain. Donald Trump is saying literally the same things as Winston Churchill, and yet it's very, very hard to persuade the populace to go along with it. And I think that that is where we need to change. Because the minute we start saying to ourselves that this is about our freedom, our democracy, and our human rights, not through the Human Rights Act, but those inalienable rights we were born with. What a great phrase, by the way, and every British person needs to learn that. Inalienable rights. What they mean by that is you were born with them. Born that way, baby. You have a right. There's no human rights, there's inalienable rights. God put you on this earth to have the right to free speech, to have the right to free assembly, to have the right to a family, inalienable rights. But until we start standing up for that, then we're lost, aren't we? You know, all the jobs get sent over to China. We have uncontrolled immigration. We have somebody accused of SA of their own children, and then they're able to sue the government to stay in the country and say that they have a right to family life. All of this is an attack on us. And I say that we need to start remembering what we're here for. And I think Donald Trump has started that intensive way. By the way, I think Zelensky's done it a little bit as well. We've started to say, well, hang on, who are we and why are we here? And for me, the reason I'm sitting here is because I want to pass on to the next generation of the Walker family the same rights and freedoms and liberties that my mother and father passed on to me. I'm not claiming for 1 second that my mum and dad were the greatest experts in democracy, freedom, liberty, or any of those sorts of things. They're ordinary working people who went from the bottom to the top. I had a comparatively privileged upbringing in the sense that we had no money, but we went to private school, which I suppose is privileged compared to most people. But you know, we did pass on. They did pass on that sense of liberty to me, that sense of democracy, that sense of freedom to me, and we have to pass it on to the next generation. And I end this where I started it. If we need to start talking openly about freedom, then let's have that open debate. Let's start saying to ourselves, well, hang on a second, I'm willing to spend $350 billion of US money to defend freedom, but I want to debate what freedom is. I want to debate whether Ukraine could have done a better job. I want to debate whether Russia could have done a better job, because remember, they always say it's old men that start wars and young men that fight wars, and there's something true in that. Imagine me now creating a war and then expecting your children to go and fight it on my. Somebody just called me a posh boy. You can't do that. Yeah, posh boy. Goodness me. I'll tell you something. I will outdrink you in a pint drinking competition in any working men's club in this country. By the way, that does look very ginger under that light. I want to say to you, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. But I want to leave you with one final thing. We are a community and a group of people who are attempting to defend freedom. I want you tonight to put in your prayers all the political prisoners who are being attacked and being abused over freedom tonight. Tommy Robinson has had he's had his rations reduced. Doesn't that sound like the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany? He's had his rations reduced, and he's had the number of people who can visit him reduced. I know that many of you are not obsessed with Christianity or patriotism or love of the flag or love of the country, and some of you a combination thereof. But you know something? I've got a phrase, and it's a phrase that I always say: we are going to win. And I'll tell you why we're going to win, because we're going to be united. I say that we were right to stop the genocide in Ukraine, and we are right to support a freedom and a peace in Ukraine. I also think we're right to offer self-determination to those people who are Russian on the eastern parts of Ukraine who want to become Russia. I accept that. But never forget what we're here for. We're here to pass on this legacy to a new generation, to a next generation, to a future generation, to defend freedom, to defend liberty, and to defend those values that were passed down in the United Kingdom for 1,000 years and maybe more, 2,000 years in Christianity, and for many of you who are Jewish, longer than that. Thank you so much for watching this live stream. Hey, baby, love you, man. See you later. Goodbye. And I'll tell you what we'll do. Just because I had to make this earlier, I'll give you the opening thing once again, just to end the show.